Hello, I'm Paul Illingworth, and I'm here at the Castro Valley Christmas Tree Farm. And today I want to talk through these videos, I want to talk about how to increase your seedling survival on a Christmas tree farm. And just as a caveat, I'm in California, central part of California. We have a Mediterranean climate here, so a lot of the things that I say about how to get better seedling survival may just apply to California. Some may apply to other parts of the country like the Pacific Northwest, the Midwest, and the East, and so forth. But a lot of these, the tips that I give you will be more for the California and the choose and cut grower rather than the wholesale grower. But I think these tips are going to be very apropos for all Christmas tree growers. So I want to kind of divide it into two areas. The first one is just kind of general tips about how to get better seedling survival. And then I'm going to, in the second part of the video, I'm going to demonstrate one technique that we use here at the Castro Valley Farm that has given us much better survival on our Douglas fir. Before I use this technique, we got maybe 30 to 40% survival on our Douglas fir. After I've used this technique that I'm going to demonstrate later on in the video, we are up to about 70 or 80% survival. So I think that might be worth listening to and hanging in there to get an idea of what this technique is that we use to get better seedling survival. But first of all, I want to talk about general tips about survival. And one is about species and seed source. Now, here in California, there are certain parts of California where different species do better. Let me give you an example. If I was in the Central Valley of California where it's very hot and dry in the summertime, I'd never plant Douglas fir, because if you plant Douglas fir in there, the first year the seedlings are going to pretty much all die. So that's the first thing to realize, is make sure the species that you're planting in your area actually can be grown in that area. Another example I can give you is if you were up in the mountains of California, up in the Sierra Mountains, you'd never plant a Monterey pine, for example, because it's too cold up there. Monterey pine do not do well in cold areas. One rule of thumb that I use when I'm planting species is look at parks, the freeway, look in the backyards of people's houses. What's growing back there? Is Doug fir growing back there? Coast redwoods, Monterey pine trees, what's growing in the neighborhood where your tree farm is, and then match your species to that area. Another thing you need to think about is on your different Christmas tree farm, on the land, what species are going to do best on a certain part of the land. For example, here in Castro Valley, we grow mostly Douglas fir. Probably 80% of our trees are Douglas fir. But we have certain areas on the farm that Douglas fir just don't grow. We planted Douglas fir there, they die, the seedlings die, poor survival. And over the years, we've determined that, for example, on a hillside where the aspect is very sunny and the clay, it's a very heavy clay soil, Douglas fir just don't grow there. So we don't even try anymore. We put in Monterey pines, we put in cedars and cypress in those areas, which tend to grow a little better in dry areas and in sunny areas. So match your species to your area that you're in, and match the species to the different sites on your tree farm. Getting back to seed species, I forgot to mention, this is a good example right here, and you look around, I have Douglas fir growing here, I have some grand fir growing, I have some white fir, concolor growing here, and I also have some coast redwood. This is kind of a shady spot of the tree farm. So in the shady spots, I've come to the conclusion that these are the species that grow well. For example, this Doug fir you see here is pretty sparse looking because it's growing in the shade. So that's why it's probably better to grow true fir in here, which do better in the shade. So moving on, we're going to talk about seedling types right now. What are the different seedlings that you can get from a nursery? And this can affect your seedling survival also. In the old days, 40, 50 years ago, the only thing you could buy were bare root seedlings. They didn't have those plugs. For example, we get our seedlings now in plugs like this from the nursery. And back in the old days, they didn't have plugs. They had bare roots, and they still have bare roots nowadays. Bare roots are determined by a number. For example, a 1-0 bare root seedling, 1-0, means it grew for 1 year in the nursery. They pulled it up and they sent it to the grower. A 2-0 means it was grown in the nursery for 2 years, and then it was pulled up, sent to the grower. However, a 2-1 would be a tree that was grown for 2 years in the nursery. It was pulled and transplanted into another nursery bed to grow another year. Most of your true fir, or a lot of your true fir, are in the 2-0 and the 2-1 category, and they're usually pretty big trees by the time they come out of the nursery, because a 2-year-old tree or a 3-year-old tree is going to be pretty big. It's going to have a big top. It's going to have a lot of stringy roots to it. A plug is another type of seedling type that you have, and a plug is different. They have different sizes of plugs. I really like this size here. They have them that are shorter, that have about a 4 or 5 inch plug to it. I like this size right here. This is an example of a Doug fir that I have. This is this is about the size of trees that I like. You notice the Doug fir is starting to sprout out a little bit here. We're in the 1st of May right now, and we're just starting to get some sprouts out of the seedlings and the big trees. I like to plant about an 8-inch. I don't like it to plant anything that's more than about 18 inches. This is a Monterey cypress. It's about 16 inches. Any bigger than that, I do not like to plant. Now, that doesn't mean you can't plant a bigger tree, but the bigger the tree, I've found, the less survival you have. That's just a rule of thumb that I have. But a lot of growers, for example, wholesale growers up in the Pacific Northwest, will plant big Douglas fir and true fir, you know, they're 2-0s or 2-1s, and they have good survival because the conditions up there are a little, it's moisture, they get a little bit of summer rain. Here in California, we have 6 months of no rain. So a little seedling like this is going to survive better than a big one. Just a rule of thumb. This is the container you'd get a plug in, but this is called a slip. And a lot of the species that we have here in California, the Monterey cypress and the Monterey, the cedars rather, sometimes they'll come in little containers like this. These are meant more for transplanting into a big container. You pull it out, you transplant it into a big container, and you've got a pretty big tree. Some growers will actually take these slips and they'll take a plug and they'll put it into a big container. Now, what happens is if they have a little nursery area in their Christmas tree farm, they will transplant these trees into a container like this, and then they'll plant them the following year as a big tree. So that's a possibility too. You almost have to have irrigation to do that though here in California, because if I was to try to do that here, it probably would not work very well because we don't have any irrigation here. So we have anything from a bare root to a plug to a liner, and then to larger pots like this. Okay, the next thing we want to talk about is the seedling size, which I kind of mentioned before. I like anything from an 8 to an 18-inch seedling. This is a Douglas fir that we have in a plug. This is a bigger plug. I don't like this big a plug. That's a pretty big plug. But this is a concolor fir, or a white fir, and you can see they've already started to bud out for the year. Later on, I'm going to talk about when to plant. I would never plant something like this at this time of the year. It's just too tender over here, but we'll talk about that later. This, again, is the Monterey cypress, and I would not want to plant anything much bigger than this. Seedling size is very critical. Plant the size that's going to do the best in your farm. So the other thing is the condition of your seedling. And this is kind of up to the nursery how they handle seedlings. What they do in a nursery is whatever you order, they'll pull the plug. If it's a plug like this, they'll pull it out of the container, and you can see the root system there. They'll pull it out of the container and they'll package them together in a basket, a lot of times in a bag like this. They'll put maybe 20 seedlings in there. They'll protect the root system, and that's the important thing. Protect the root system at all times. And the nursery, if it's a good nursery, will package the root system in a plastic bag like this. And then they'll put it in a big plastic bag, all the seedlings you've ordered in a big plastic bag, close it up, and put it in a box and send it to you. So that's usually the way they ship the seedlings. If you want to go to a nursery, most nurseries will let you come to the nursery as long as you phone ahead and pick up your seedlings there. That's really the best way to do it. Because when you ship, the nursery ships UPS or FedEx. Think about it. It's 3 days in this box. Who knows where that box is? Is it in one of the FedEx trucks? Is it sitting in some warehouse that's really warm? You never know what's happening to the box when it's in UPS, FedEx. Usually they're pretty good though. If you order, usually a nursery will only let you ship on a Monday. If you ship on a Monday, you should get the seedlings by Wednesday or Thursday. They never like to ship on a Thursday or Friday because over the weekend, sometimes UPS and FedEx doesn't make any deliveries. So if it sits in a warehouse somewhere, that's not a good thing. That's not such a good thing. Trust your nursery. If you have a good nursery that you go to and it's a reliable nursery, they should do you right on how they're handling the seedlings. Okay, let's assume the nursery has done their job and given you a good seedling and given you a well-protected seedling. Now it's your responsibility as a grower to handle it correctly. When you get your seedlings, you should check them out and see the condition of the tops. You should look at the condition of the root system, and if you look at this root system, it looks a little bit dry. So what I would do, either moisten this somehow, maybe dip it in water. There are some gels that you can get that if you dip the tree in the gel, it helps the transplant shock and so forth. But at least on a seedling like this, you might want to moisten that root system a little bit, okay? So it's your responsibility from here on to make sure you're handling the roots, the seedlings correctly. Make sure you protect the roots at all times. That's the most important thing. Now, once you get your box of seedlings, make sure if you can't plant it right away that you store it in a cool, shady spot. Sun is the worst thing for these seedlings. Even if you're planting, while you're planting, put the box of the seedlings in. You can leave the seedlings in the box that it comes in, but if you're planting, leave that box in the shade somewhere, not out in the sun, because it's going to dry up the root system and the top for that matter. So handle them correctly. If you think you cannot plant trees in 3 or 4 days maybe after you get them from the nursery, store the box again in a shady, cool spot. And if it's going to be in the box for quite a while, you might think about taking them out of the box. What I like to do is, if I know that I won't be able to plant my box of seedlings for maybe 3, 4 days, even 5 days, I will take them and put them up like this in the box so that no mold or mildew gets on the tops of the trees. That's what you're worried about when they sit in the box for a while, especially Monterey pines. Monterey pines, you got to plant those right away. If you don't plant them right away, you got to get them out of the box because they get moldy. They get mold on them very quickly. Doug fir, true fir, not so much, but still you need to deal with them if you're not going to plant for a while. In the old days, we used to take bare roots and heel them in, it was called. And you'd make a trench in some really good soil or in your nursery area of your tree farm. You'd put the bare roots, line them up in there, and then put soil over them and so forth. We don't do that anymore. I don't like bare roots. I like to get them planted right away, but that is one possibility. So let's talk about planting method. This may have a little bit to do with the survival of your seedlings, because if you don't plant correctly, then you're in trouble. One of the main ways that wholesale growers and big operations plant their seedlings is with a tractor and a machine planter. And you've probably seen these online, little videos. I was just watching a video of some planting back in the Midwest, and it was really interesting to see. They have these huge seedlings with these big rangy root systems, and it seems to me they weren't protecting that root system very well when they were planting. They were kind of holding the trees up. I'm not gonna disparage anybody in their planting methods, but again, if you're tractor planting or any kind of planting you're doing, protect the seedlings all the time, or the root system. So machine planting is very quick. One of the problems that you might have with machine planting, and this is true with any kind of bare root, is what's called J roots. And when you plant a bare root seedling like this, you have the root system hanging down. A lot of times when you stick it in the hole, the bottom of the root system will turn up, and that's called a J root. If that happens, then later on you're going to have problems with your trees. So whatever method you're using, if you're planting bare roots, make sure you don't get that J root and you're protecting the root system. Bare roots, you've got to protect the root system even more than plugs, because that's what they're all bare and they're hanging out, and there's nothing to protect them. Now, what I like to do is I use, other methods are like an auger. A lot of people, you use an auger, drill down a 5-inch auger, and then they'll plant the trees. One of the things you got to be careful about if you have an auger planting is that when you backfill the soil, you plant the tree, you backfill the soil, sometimes during the year that soil will drop down and compact. So be careful about that. A shovel is another possibility. Another thing that is a planting tool is called a dibble, and it has rather than a planting bar like this, it has a round thing on it, and you just jam it into the soil, and you put the plug in there, and you're done. You kind of heel it in. One of the problems with that is when you put a dibble down, if you got real heavy clay soil, it kind of slicks the side of the soil, and it doesn't allow the root system to kind of expand out into the rest of the soil. What we use is a planting bar like this. It's a big heavy-duty planting bar. It's the one with a V shape at the bottom. We like to put this planting bar in a lot deeper than what the seedling is, so make sure we have enough in there. This we found to be the fastest way to do it and the best way to do it. Again, you got to protect the root system. I'm not going to go through a big planting deal. That's not necessary. But there is one thing I'd like to mention when you're using plugs. Make sure the plug, when you put it into the hole, is kind of roughed up a little bit. I don't know how else to explain it. But you don't want, a lot of times a plug will be root bound, it's called. And the root system, you'll just know the root system just packed in there real tightly. And that's not so good if you were to plant it in there. So what we like to do, if you can zoom in on this, Owen. By the way, Owen is my filmster here, and he's going to edit the thing. So I thank him for doing that. What we like to do, this is just a regular fork, and the tines are kind of pointed out. If it's a root-bound seedlings, we'll take it like this and shoot it along the tines, and you can see how that kind of makes the root system shaggy. And then when you plant it with the planting bar, these roots kind of can expand out a little more. I'm not going to tell you which way you should plant. I will tell you though that you need to protect the root systems as much as you can, and you need to do the job carefully. I tell my guys that are planting, I say, I don't care how fast you are, I just care how careful you are. I never like to, quite frankly, I don't like to to hire young kids, like high school kids, to plant, because a lot of times after an hour or so, they get tired, they get sloppy, and they don't do a really good job. That's just my opinion. But just, you need to make sure that they're doing a careful job and they're planting correctly, because that's the main thing that's going to kill a seedling out during the first year of growth. Okay, next subject I want to take care of is, when should you plant your trees? And this is open to a lot of speculation. It really depends on what your climate is. I'll talk about what we hear in the Bay Area. We have a very Mediterranean, a very mild climate. We get rain starting in November. We get a lot of rain in December, January, February, March, it kind of eases off. April, we get a little bit of rain. By May, we're probably pretty much done with the rainfall. If you have irrigation, that doesn't matter quite so much. But we don't have irrigation here at Castro Valley, so we got to get the trees in early. We try to get all the planting done in January. We actually start planting right after we close the farm for selling. We start planting right after that, because my theory is, the longer these seedlings are in the ground, the longer they're in the ground before the dry hot weather hits in, let's say, May, June, July, the longer they're in the ground, the more time they've had to adjust. The more time the root system maybe has expanded out a little bit, and so forth. You never ever want to plant a seedling like this. This is a Douglas fir. Notice the little tips on it are just starting to come out. If I was to put this in the ground right now, I'm sure these tips would not make it. They'd all dry out and wither, especially if we get some hot weather after I plant it. So I would never wait this long. This is the 1st of May, just starting to branch out. This is not a good thing to plant right now. I have a white fir here, and this is even worse. You see, the white fir has got these little tufts on them. I'm sure this one would not do well either if I planted it out into the farm right now. Now I have a Monterey cypress here, and you can see it's a little harder. It doesn't really have any new growth, maybe a little new growth here. This one you might be able to plant a little later in the year. Again, I would not do that here at this farm. There are some growers that have irrigation, and they can plant all the way into May and June. The problem with planting late like that is that the weather, it's not only the water, because they can irrigate the plants in, it's the fact that it's so hot out there, especially in some areas in California. It gets really hot and dry, and that's going to affect the top of the seedling, and it won't have, won't have as much ability to survive. So again, I like to plant as early as possible. So be that as it may, that's just my opinion. Make sure when you plant that the soil is moist. It can't be muddy, it can't be really over wet, it's just got to be moist. A lot of growers, when they come in, they'll disc their land, and they have a real problem getting in because it gets all muddy and so forth. We don't do that here at this tree farm in Castro Valley. We don't disc the land at all, and we tend to be able to plant pretty much after a rainstorm. This would be a perfect day for planting. It's nice and cloudy out, the sun's not out, it's cloudy, it's kind of misty. It's about 55, 60 degree. This would be a nice day to plant if it weren't the 1st of May. If this was like in February or January, for this tree farm anyway, this would be a perfect day. It's also nice if you get a nice rain after you plant. Now, I realize that everything can't be perfect. You have 2,000 seedlings you want to plant. You got to get them in whenever you get them in. But the ideal thing is a cool, misty, cloudy day followed by a rain in a few minutes. If you're in a situation where you can irrigate, it's nice to kind of irrigate the seedlings in. So where your farm is has a lot to be determined by when you plant. Here in the Bay Area, we can plant starting in December, January, February. If you're up in the mountains of the Sierra Mountains, you can't plant when it's snowy and cold, so you've got to wait a little bit. Some people in the mountains actually plant in the fall, like in October, November. They'll plant The snows will come, the coldness will come, and then they'll have all their planting done. But most of the time, a person up in the mountains has to wait a little bit before after all the snows clear and so forth. So that's pretty much my kind of general overall tips for getting some better seedling survival. Don't forget, I'm going to give you our special way that we treat the seedlings in a few minutes, but I just want to review a little bit that what you're looking for is species and seed source. What's going to fit into your farm? The seedling type, what's going to be best for your farm? Do you want bare roots? Do you want plugs? Do you want big containers? What's your situation at your tree farm? The seedling size and conditions, very important. And that's kind of up to the nursery. Find a good nursery that's got good seedlings, that has consistent seedling. That's the important thing, is consistency. If I get Douglas fir like this, that are all the same, just like that, that's what I want. I don't want a big one here and then a little bitty one here. That's what a lot of nurseries will give you. They'll give you everything from 3-inch tree to an 18-inch tree. That's not so good. You need good consistency. The handling, that's up to you as a grower. You've got to be able to handle the seedlings correctly. Your planting method is kind of up to what you have determined, but again, just be careful that you protect the root system. And then, so the planting method is kind of up to you. The time and the condition of the seedlings, the time is kind of be up to you also, depending on where you are in the country or in California, and what your situation is. Now we're going to go on, and I'm going to give you a little demonstration of what we do that has gotten our seedling survival up to be as good as it is. So now I'm going to talk about what we do to get our survival up, especially with Douglas fir and true fir. Monterey pine, cedars, cypress, we usually don't have too much of a problem getting those to survive. But you could do this method on any species, it doesn't matter. If you're a wholesale grower, this is kind of a time-consuming thing that we do. However, a choose and cut grower, this would be ideal for getting your survival of your seedling up a little bit. So what we do is we have a weed mat followed by chips. And this is what I mean by a weed mat. It looks something like this. And there are different types of weed mats. You can buy these at Home Depot in big rolls, and then we cut them up into 12 by 12 sections like this. And then we put an X in the middle so we can fit it over the seedlings. So that's what that looks like. That's called the weed mat. And this is very cheap. I mean, by the time you got a big roll and you've cut them all, this is what, 10 cents or so. The labor's a little bit intensive, but you can figure out ways of doing it very quickly. So here's what we do. We have a true fir here. This is a concolor, Abies concolor, or white fir. I'll just call it a white fir. And what we do is once it's planted, and you can see we're getting little sprouts out of this one already. So what we do is once it's planted, you can see we have bare soil here. And before you put the weed mat, you ought to get some bare soil. Before you plant this, it's best to get rid of all the weeds in this area. And when I talked about survival, I didn't talk about weeds. You can't have a bunch of weeds around your seedling and expect good survival. So weed control is really important in the survival of seedlings. If you use this mat chip method, you don't have to worry too much about the weeds around here. What I like to do, we're not allowed to use any chemicals on this tree farm, but if I was allowed to use Roundup, for example, before I planted the seedling, I'd spray around here with the Roundup. And then by that time, that'll kill all the weeds. If you don't have Roundup, it's nice. You can hoe the weeds away or whatever. You can see there's no weeds around here, so that's good. I put the weed mat down like this. Put it all the way down, just like that. Now, You might say to me, well, what about everything out here? Well, this is a 1-year-old seedling. The root system is all going to be within this 1 foot radius. This is a 1 foot radius. No, I'm sorry, it's only 6 inches, but the root system is all within this mat. So you don't have to worry about weeds and moisture outside of this area. And this actually will last a whole nother year. And I'll show you some seedlings that we have from the years past that and how this helps in the time after the first year. So if you didn't have chips, you'd have to staple this down somehow, which is not a good idea. So the best thing here, we have a pitchfork, and I've got some chips. Now, where are you going to get the chips? We have a couple tree surgeons that come in and deliver chips for free. And actually, they'll do a little work for us for free because chips cost money for them to dump. So they dump as close as they can to the tree. Then we have wheelbarrows that we bring them in the chips. If you had a front load, if you had a little tractor with a front end loader, that would be ideal because you could bring it in, you could dump chips in certain areas, and then you can apply them to where you want, specifically to here. There are some tree farms, I saw a video of a tree farm the other day where the whole row was loaded with chips. Now that would be very expensive. I don't know how they did that, but that's the ideal. But if you don't have that many chips, this is a good alternative also. So what you do is you got the pitchfork, you put the chips over top of the weed mat, about 3, and then they can go a little bit out, depends on how many chips you have available. You want about 3 to 4 inches, maybe 2 to 4 inches around a seedling. I've never ever had any problems with this causing mold or mildew or whatever around the bottom of the tree. I've never had problems with that. I don't know, maybe it's because we have such dry, hot summers here in California, but I've never had that problem with these seedlings. Now, another thing that we have to do here at the Castro Valley is we have a lot of animal damage. We have wood rats that come out of the brush areas. We have mice that come along and they chew on these. Our whole farm is deer fenced, but once in a while a deer will get in here. So I have these protectors, and we have to protect the seedlings with a protector like this for the wood rats and the mice. So that's just a little extra thing that we have to do. Now, one of the things that Alejandro, my partner, has started experimenting with, especially on the true fir, because as you know, true fir really have problems if they're really sunny. He's figured out a way to put a shield on the side of this protector so that when the sun hits the seedling, it'll be protected a little bit. But here's what the chips do. I never suggest that you just use a weed mat. That doesn't work very well. You can just use chips, that's a possibility, but it doesn't work as well as the weed mat with the chips. And I did an experiment last year where I planted 30 seedlings, Doug fir seedlings. 10 of them I used no protection at all. I didn't have any weed mat or chips on the 10 seedlings. It was just bare soil, kind of like you saw here before I covered it up. Then I put another row with 10 trees where it just had chips on it. And then I put another row with the chips and the weed mat, 10 each. On the bare soil, only 3 seedlings made it out of over the summer. Now here in California, we got big problems in the summer. We have nice rain. I get about 20 inches of rain in November, December, January, February, March, a little bit of April. That's 6 months. But from June through October, we get no rain whatsoever. Now, believe it or not, we got 6 months there with no rain. So this is particularly important because this keeps the moisture down. And a second degree thing that it does is this keeps the weeds from growing up through there. And that's one of the things a weed mat does. If this was just chips, you'd get a lot more weeds coming out and you'd get less moisture protection. So the combination of the two does a really good job. Like I said, in my experiment, only 3 trees out of 10 made it without any protection at all. The part that just had the chips, about 8 of those out of 10 made it through. The part with the chips and the weed mat, all 10 trees made it through, and the growth that they had was about an inch or 2 more than any of the other sites. So that told me that this is a thing that really works. And I know there's only 30 trees that I did the experiment with, but we found out in the field when we do this procedure, it really helps. And this is what I said earlier on. We were getting about 30 or 40% survival before we did this. The year we started doing this, it raised up to about 70, 80% survival, even though we have 6 months of no rain. Now, one option for us would be to hand water these seedlings, at least for the first year. Sometimes we can't do that. Last year, we got 70 to 80% survival on Douglas fir without any kind of hand watering or irrigation whatsoever. So that tells me that this is a very effective method. So what I want to show you right now is what happened last year and the year before. We've done this procedure for 2 years, although 2 years ago we only used chips. Last year, Alejandro, my partner, said, hey, let's go full bore. We're going to treat all the seedlings with the mat and the chips. And you might say, well, you know, you've got 6 months of no rain. What if we're irrigating? You know, do we really need to do this? And I say yes, because if you do this, you have less, you can irrigate less, right? You could maybe cut your irrigation maybe in half. The other good thing about this, if you have an all-age management system where you have big trees and you have little seedlings along with the big trees, this would be ideal for the seedlings because, as you know, when you irrigate big trees, you want to irrigate less often with a more moisture. So when you put little seedlings in amongst big trees, the seedlings need to be irrigated more often. With this system, you wouldn't have to irrigate the little trees so more often. This is a tree that we did last year. You can see it had good growth here. Now we got the new growth coming on, but you can see there's still some chips left. One of the problems with doing chips only without the weed mat is the chips tend to degenerate into the soil. With the weed mat, they kind of stay on top of the weed mat and they don't degenerate into the soil. So anyway, we've had very little rain for the last 3 or 4 weeks. We had a little sprinkle last night. But I want to show you, when I dig down into this, it's all moist down there. And then I'm finding the weed mat down here, and this is very nice and moist. So after 3 weeks, we've had very little rain. And, oh, you can see a little grub there even. Interesting. So we've had very little rain, but you can see it's still nice and moist. And whenever I do this procedure, I'll look at it in June and July. I'll dig down in there, and it's dried out a little bit. But when I dig down even further, you can see the moisture is still in the soil down under the weed mat. So this is what what it looks like after a year. You can see a little bit of the chips. The chips will degenerate after a while. For example, over here, we have a tree from 2 years ago, and we just used chips here, and you can see there's still some chips left, but not very many. So, you know, after a couple, I'd say this procedure works at least for the first year, probably for the second year, and then after that, you know, the effectiveness has probably gone away. So as you can see with this procedure, not only are we retaining the moisture in the soil for a lot longer, but also we're controlling the weeds around that. You can see this was done this year. This is a concolor, white fir. We put the weed mat down. These are the chips that went around the weed mat. We protected it from the animals. But you can see we're not going to get any weed growth through these chips because of the weed mat and the chips. So if I could spray, which I can't, if I came through here with Roundup and wanted to spray, as you know, Roundup Talk about affecting seedling survival. Roundup is a killer on seedlings, especially Monterey pine. So be careful whenever you, I'm going way back here, but be careful whenever you use Roundup, especially around new seedlings, especially with Monterey pine. Don't get any of the Roundup on the tree. Don't get any mist on it. If it's a windy day, don't even bother spraying. Roundup is really bad on most seedlings, but it's particularly bad on Monterey pine. Anyway, if I was spraying with Roundup here, notice I would only have to spray. I wouldn't have to get very close to the seedling because those chips are gonna protect it. Now, after a couple years, this is, for example, after 1 year, you can see there's very few weeds still around it. After 2 years, you're gonna get probably an influx of weeds, but by that time, you know, you can maybe spray a little closer to the tree and you won't have as many problems. So that's it. We've talked about basic tips of weed survival. This method where I use the weed mat and the chips, you know, try it out. See what happens. Try it on 100 seedlings. It's very easy to do. I think the cost is pretty minimal, probably $1 per seedling maybe. I don't know, maybe not even that much. If you can kind of make the system a little more efficient, it's well worth the money that you're putting into it and the time and effort, especially on a smaller farm. So that's about it. I can see no stopping us in doing this particular procedure and following the rules that I've set out on how to get better seedling survival.